So excited. Welcome, guys. I get to kick it off. So I hope you guys are ready. I hope you got your coffee, your herbal teas, whatever you need. Thank you so much for attending the 2022 Mental Health Equity and Liberation Summit. It's hosted by No More Martyrs, which I'm a big fan of. The name of this session, No Justice, No Health, Justice as a Mental Health Initiative. Again, just like what Nadia said, if you are receiving continuing education for this session, please sign in now through the link that Chandrika just shared. My name is Renee N. Smith, LMSW. I currently work in the profession of trying to get wellness out as well. So I am also a co-founder of Yes, I Have a Therapist. And at this time, I would like to invite each and every single one of our panelists to introduce themselves.
I can start off if my mic is working. I can't tell. Huh. Okay. Yeah, we'll have the death jokes all day. Here we are. Hi, I'm Rikki Poynter. I started off my main career as a YouTuber, but I'm also a writer. I'm a public speaker. I just started doing a lot of focusing on like consulting for businesses or schools, really anybody that, you know, needs consulting about like being accessible from a business standpoint, or whether it's like their online content like closed captioning. Like if you watch my YouTube channel, which is just my name, I talk a lot about, you know, getting properly done captions on YouTube videos or really anything online content wise, but also like if you've got stuff like employees in person, you know, I consult on that as well. And yeah, I just spend a lot of time sitting right here and yelling into the void about accessibility. That's me in a nutshell.
Thank you for being here. Next.
Hello. I am Dr. Martez Files. I am incoming assistant professor of Black Studies and Teacher Education at the University of Pittsburgh. I'm also a community activist and organizer in Birmingham. I've been organizing here around mental health, social justice, and racial equity for over a decade. And it is a pleasure. Thank you, No More Martyrs, and thank you everyone who has attended this session, as well as my incredible panelists. Honored.
Thank you for being here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lee Gaston. I'm a therapist in the Birmingham area with sort of a generalist practice, but a lot of focus on trauma. That's my day job. I also have another interest and purpose and passion, which is kind of a wannabe community organizer. And I work with an organization called the Alabama Network for Mental Health Justice, which is not professional based, but more mutual aid based. And I'm really honored and excited to be with y'all. I'm just learned so much already, and I'm looking forward to learning from my other panelists.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for being here. I'm going to start off with Dr. Martez. You're new with the doctorate, correct? Am I right about that?
You are right. I just got my doctorate last year. So yeah.
Congratulations. So Dr. Martez, can you contextualize and explain the various ways that injustice can impact mental and holistic health?
Absolutely. And so I think one, I want to start by just thinking about, hey, everyone who's speaking to me in the chat. I just want to start by thinking about what mental health is, right? As well as what holistic health is. So one of the things that we have to be very clear about is that anything and everything impacts our mental health, but particularly systems of oppression and injustice, because those things can be felt on a personal level as well as a vicarious level. So we can feel what happens to us, but we can also feel what happens to people around us and people that we care about. And for those reasons, it can be very compounding, particularly for folks on the margins, because those folks often experience trauma both interpersonally and vicariously. And so when we talk about contextualizing social oppression and injustices in relation to mental health, we're thinking about all the ways that folks are harmed, targeted, abused, disrespected, and made to feel invaluable and invalidated. And those things show up in a range of ways. So for those of us who study race, class, gender, sexual orientation, and ability, age, or the gamut of marginalized abilities, marginalized identities, we understand that racism and institutional systemic racism impacts folks in real ways. We understand that classism and sexism, the ways that folks are disproportionately impacted by their income levels or by their gender, sex, by their sexual orientation. We understand that all of those things also are impacted by systems, by policies, by interpersonal practices, and there's an everydayness to those things as well. And so one of the things that I know as an activist and an organizer is that when I see something happen in my community, that impacts me on a deeply personal level, right? So I might miss sleep because of that. I might lay up awake thinking about how to impact that. I might feel charged and feel a social duty and responsibility to that. All of those things impact how I feel about myself. And we know that mental health can have an effect on our physical health as well, right? We understand that anything felt and compounded over time can impact our physical health in weird ways. So that means, you know, those of us who are more likely to experience hypertensive issues, heart attack, stroke, and other forms of physical pain related to identity. And so I just want to start with that. And we can move the conversation, but if we lay that as a foundation, I think we can think about the ways that marginalized identities in particular are very susceptible to the impacts of mental health and social injustice.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I always think about the body keeps the score. And so many times we're not even aware of how different things are impacting us. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to move on to Lee. How does traditional curriculum for licensed mental health professionals leave providers ill-equipped for understanding the unique challenges of historically marginalized and disadvantaged populations? So it's a mouthful. You're currently muted.
Yeah, when I read that question and started thinking about it, thinking about an answer, it just got bigger and bigger. And I started to say the short answer is everything. You know, it may be that we have to defund mental health and start from scratch rather than trying to fix it, because it's, you know, it grew up and evolved in this smog, as one panelist said. But a couple of things came to my mind that I wanted to point out, and Dr. Files mentioned context, and I think that that's not, we weren't taught to understand the mental well-being in the context of whole person well-being and in the context of the ecology of the society and, you know, their whole environment. So it's a real paradigm shift that needs to happen. When I think about the evolution of our understanding of trauma, I think in The Body Keeps the Score, Dr. Vanderkolk said that back in the 70s, they were with the Vietnam vets were coming back and they were hallucinating and hearing things. They thought they'd become psychotic, and so they gave them antipsychotics. So it's our understanding of trauma is really recent, and brain science, and you know, that has helped tremendously with kind of understanding that trauma is a medical condition. You know, so that's a great example of how I feel like we should be trained to know that part of everything that we were being taught is incorrect, and it's our responsibility to be ready to learn and unlearn throughout our career. Another thing that I think is really important that is very relevant to me is I wasn't taught about professional privilege, or privilege in general, and how that I'm carrying you know, levels of privilege. I'm white male professional, you know, I don't know all the levels of privilege I carry. And that inevitably, if I'm not conscious of that, I'm going to act it out on unsuspecting innocent bystanders. And so learning how to, like a self-care plan that includes, for white people, privileged people, is not comforting ourselves, but how to regulate ourselves in our discomfort so that we can, you know, experience that and be changed by it, and how to recognize it as it comes out so we can either apologize immediately or maybe hopefully learn to catch it before it comes out. So that whole training of self-care and, you know, developing a professional self was not very well taught, but I didn't learn anything about privilege. I graduated in 1995, so things may have changed tremendously. But so like trauma, our understanding of race is evolving. One of the experiences that I had that really helped me kind of get it on a personal level, I was reading a book called The Gods of the Upper Air, and it just repeated the fact that race is, you know, has no biological basis, but I kind of got it. And so I went and looked in the mirror, and I realized I was completely, I could not see myself as anything other than a white person. So that's how deeply ingrained that is, that it totally controls my perception of myself. And knowing that, you know, people are different, you know, but those categories are totally false in the sense of biology, but they're profoundly real socially, interpersonally, you know, power structure. So yeah, I had to learn that after I graduated and after I became interested in justice and involved in that. Yeah, so that's a couple of points that conclusions I've come to.
Thank you for sharing that. Trauma is a medical condition. That is something that I definitely picked up. And I don't think, especially in marginalized communities, they don't feel safe to share a lot of their trauma, or they minimize the trauma that they have. And so having providers that can really dig in there and get people talking and asking the right questions is vitally important. So thank you for doing the self-work, and hopefully this is encouraging other people to do that as well. Rikki, oftentimes conversations around equity and access fail to take an intersectional approach. That includes those who are disabled. What experiences inspired you towards deaf advocacy?
It's Wednesday. It's Wednesday morning. We're on a coffee.
Like my mouth is stuck. Like, I don't know, but yes, talk about your activism. There it goes. That's the word I was looking for.
Oh God, I mean, I don't know how much time we have. I feel like all these experiences are the length of a CVS receipt. Like we could go on all day, but to try to consolidate as much as I can, like my activism kind of branches out into various kinds of categories, like the kind where, like, you know, I grew up as a mainstream deaf person, so I grew up with spoken language, not ASL, didn't go to a deaf school. So part of that was me trying to find like my identity as a deaf person and actually getting like real like language acquisition, like starting to learn ASL and actually knowing my accessibility rights, because like going into high school, I was just kind of like, cool, I don't know what I actually have rights to. I'm just gonna sit here and take whatever nonsense people give to me. And then other parts of activism, like, you know, like I was explaining earlier, the accessibility in terms of like captions or, you know, ASL interpreters on video content, things like that. But also talking about, so I'm actually on theme here with this, mental health, where, you know, like I grew up like with everybody else with a bunch of, you know, nonsense in life, and, you know, that creates trauma and things that people, you know, usually tend to work through or try to work through with therapy. But the lack of real proper therapy for deaf and hard of hearing people is an issue where, like, you know, I've spent years trying to find therapists that would be more accessible to me. Like, like my ASL isn't there yet, it's not quite fluent, but I can get it to a point where I can understand it. But like, you know, these practices aren't really they should be, but they don't really want to pay for an interpreter, and trying to find therapists that are fluent in ASL is difficult. I didn't get my hearing aids until last August, first time I've ever had hearing aids. That's a whole other accessibility activism issue in itself, so it's just trying to get mental health access and therapy, to try not to get worse and worse is a really big issue. So I've, talked about that a lot. And just recently, it was like 2 years ago, I attempted therapy, but it was really difficult because, like, again, I didn't have my hearing aids in, and she didn't know ASL, she wasn't going to get an interpreter. And so, like, she would be using, like, there's this app called Big, right? And you can use voice to text, like this blurring thing. Like, the bit more text you have, the smaller it gets. And so she would be like speaking into the microphone, and it would be like this back and forth. But it was so unhelpful at the end of the day because it didn't feel like a natural type of session where normally, at least from what I'm judging from watching TV shows and movies, like you have like an actual flowing conversation that is of help and like, this and that. But it just didn't feel like that with the therapist, because she'll be saying one thing and then, like, I have to read it, and then she'll say this and then I have to read it, and it didn't really do anything. And yeah, so that's pretty much essentially what made me have to. It's not like, I don't think for a lot of us, we wake up one day and go, I want to spend my time fighting for things all day, every day for decades on end, and like, this sounds like so much fun. But that's kind of what, well, if nobody else is going to do it, or if there's not enough people doing it, here we are.
I love that. That's usually how it kind of happens. We kind of fall into some of these things because we end up being that voice. So thank you for using your voice. Is there anything that you want to kind of share? Because we're talking about, I just asked Lee about being ill-equipped. So the accessibility part, like, I've been through school. I don't even remember having a section on talking to individuals with various disabilities. So is there anything in particular that, would be helpful? Because I think even for the clinician, they may be afraid to kind of broach different things. Is there something that we need to have in our paperwork? Like, how can we make sure that we are being as inclusive as possible? If you have anything.
Yeah, I think the main thing is ask the actual person themselves, the disabled student, the disabled client, deaf client, whoever, whatever. We're just going to say disabled for general. We could go on all day listing. But yeah, like, even two deaf people like me and myself, you could have another deaf person on this panel, right? And like, I would prefer captions for accessibility just because I'm fluent in English and because this is business, I don't want to accidentally misunderstand anything, right? And the Bob here could prefer, ASL interpreters. We could also prefer like two completely different ASL interpreters, like if it was a Black deaf person on the panel, they would probably prefer a Black interpreter, right? Because it's just the way language works. And so it's just going to be a lot easier if that person, if the doctor, the teacher, whoever asks that disabled client, student, whatever specifically. But obviously, like, just to have your general accessibility down, like, make sure, like, for example, one of my biggest things in school was that when we would have to, like, watch documentaries or something, usually in science and history classes, right? And then we'd have to, like, take notes or whatever based on what we would hear. But for me, it didn't work out very well because I would be able to hear it, but it just sounds like if I'm watching a movie in Korean or something without the English subtitles. It's like, I know you're saying something to me, but I don't know what you're saying, right? And so, like, when I would tell teachers that, they would just be like, oh, well, just sit next to the computer speaker or something. I'm like, oh, that's great. It's just louder. It's just louder and even more muffled. Like, and so it would get to a point. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Like, it's not helping me. So, and I actually remember when this was in U.S. history, and I was trying to turn in my paper of obviously incomplete notes, and the teacher just ended up, he didn't mention any names specifically, but it was pretty obvious who it was going to be that was being talked about, just making fun of my paper and like reading it out to the class, which again brings me back to where I was like, I wish I would have known my rights were when I was 13, because then I wouldn't just sat back and just be like laughing along with it to avoid any confrontation. And like, when my math teacher, he would have all his teaching stuff in the front, but he liked to sit in the back. and math is very visual. So half the time I'm like looking at the visual part because you have to understand the visual part. But then obviously comes with an explanation. So I have to go turn around and figure out what he's saying behind me. But then I missed the visual part, right? So generally, it's just if there's something is a video, get captions for it, things like that. Have an interpreter on hand, note takers even. It's all going to depend on an individual basis. It's just having a couple of general accessibility things, and overall just not being am I allowed to say this, butthead to people. That works a lot. That's going to go beyond anything.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that, because like I said, I know a lot of clinicians too, they kind of fear kind of digging into that. So I just want to kind of put it out there, ask the client what their needs are. Okay, Dr. Martez, back to you. According to the American Psychological Association, APA, racism is a form of trauma. Whether implicit, explicit, systematic, or structural, racism leads to serious psychological distress. As an activist, educator, and community organizer, how do you protect your wellness, and what do licensed mental health professionals need to know to provide culturally responsive supports to activists?
Yeah, that's a big question and an important question. What do I do to protect my own mental health and keep myself well? Some of the things that I've been doing is talking to licensed professionals, but culturally competent and culturally responsive licensed professionals, people who have actually thought about what communities of color need, what folks on the margins need. I spend a lot of time in conversation and community with folks who are really struggling. And I think sometimes those shared experiences with each other kind of help me. Like, it makes me feel not alone, not afraid. So sometimes there's a solidarity that we create with each other. And honestly, being an activist in itself is a form of taking care of myself, knowing that I am standing against systems of violence, systems of oppression, knowing that I'm fighting against things that are actively harming me and my folks. Honestly makes me feel a little bit better about those things. I also have a therapist, and I try to go at least once a month if I can. I was recently diagnosed in 2018 with bipolar 1 and depression, and I had to get medications for those things, right? And so actively taking my medications in the ways that I need, actively getting the rest that I need, trying to do right with my diet are some of the ways that I've protected myself and kept myself healthy and all in this work. And honestly, taking breaks. One thing that I often tell activists and organizers, particularly new activists and organizers or young activists and organizers, is that if you don't take breaks, you will burn out unquestionably, because the work never stops and people never stop relying on you. They never stop calling you. They never stop inboxing you. So if you do not take breaks, and I mean an unapologetic, hey, I'm not responding to messages for the next 7 days. Hey, I'm not doing anything for the next whatever. If you don't do that, people will always step on your boundaries. And so I'm saying, be unapologetic with your rest. Another thing that I've also been talking to activists and organizers about is battlefield and compassion fatigue. So because we do so much care work, sometimes we've exerted so much of that effort or so much of that care energy that we sometimes can't care about certain things, or we'll become apathetic, or we'll become uncaring. And people will think like, oh my God, something is wrong with me. And it's like, no, you have been doing a lion's share of care work, and now you are compassion fatigued and you really don't have it in you right now. And so I want to ensure that young folks know that it is okay to fight for the things that you believe in and stand up for those things, but it is also okay to take breaks when you need them. So that's one piece. And then what medical professionals and licensed professionals can do is really educate themselves around systems of violence and oppression. I really need licensed professionals to be thinking about race in critical ways, gender in critical ways, disability in critical ways. All of those things will help strengthen you as a practitioner. It will help you care for folks way better than you have been doing. And I want to reiterate what one of my panelists said. You got to listen to folks too, right? If folks are telling you that they are hurting or that they need a particular thing, right? If they're telling you, hey, I need an interpreter here, or hey, I need captions here, or hey, I need, you know, whatever they need, right? I need a chair, I need shade, because some folks really do need that. Or hey, I need folks to have a mic, right? I'm at large events all the time, and some of my folks are saying, they'll say, well, I don't need a mic because I can project. And they're like, no, I need you to have a mic because I need to hear you more clearly, right? And that's an access issue. That's about ability. And I think if you're critical about those things, you'll want to change those. You'll want to be as responsive as possible. And so again, some of those things are small steps that I do to protect myself, but those are also suggestions and strategies for professionals that I think might be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for also sharing your diagnosis. I think one of the things that we can sometimes do as well is just like, oh, this is not what a person with depression looks like. This is not what a person with anxiety looks like. You're expecting them to look a certain way, and it affects all of us, you know, all of us in different ways. And it does not mean that you can't be successful even on paper and not be struggling. So thank you so much for saying that, because I know a lot of people are like, oh, well, he does this or she does that, or they do this, or, you know, and they're just checking off the box, and then they feel inadequate with the comparison. So saying that, one, that we're all human, that we all have needs that need to be tapped into, that need to be spoken up for, is very important. One of the things that I really want to highlight is when you said be unapologetic with your rest. And I think when you are an activist, when you are in the community, that is very difficult because sometimes people can make you feel bad about it. So is there some sort of conversation that you can kind of have towards that? Because I think sometimes we get into this battle with ourselves, but then we have to defend it to the outward public. So do you have anything that you can kind of help us, maybe some wording, maybe some affirmations? Maybe I'm just asking for myself selfishly, but is there anything that you can kind of empower us with to help us with the no? Because sometimes that can be difficult.
Yeah, the language that I often tell folks is capacity, right? What can you hold at this time? The language must be centered around capacity, because it's not really about your ability, right? If you are somebody who is an advocate, you know how to advocate. It is, do you have the emotional, mental, or physical capacity to do this thing at this time? And so I think if we reorient the conversation around capacity and letting folks know, hey, I absolutely care about this, and this is important to me, but at this moment, I am emotionally, I'm at capacity. I'm at my emotional capacity, meaning I am emotionally drained and burnt out. I can't handle it. I'm at my physical capacity, meaning I need rest. I need to eat. I need to sleep. Right? That language sometimes disarms folks who might try to make you feel bad about what you have the capacity to do, right? Because it's not about me not caring about you or not caring about your cause or not caring about the things that you need me to be focused on. It is about what I personally need to be well in this moment. And I'll be honest, if you are not at your best self, you will not be the most effective organizer. You will not be the most effective activist. So if you have not rested, if you have not eaten, if you have not slept, if you have not done the things that you need to do, you won't be as effective as you need to be. And that is also a reminder, right, to folks. So again, I think reframing that language around capacity and letting folks know, hey, I can get back to you in a week or so. Or, hey, here's a friend of mine who is also doing similar work, who might be able to help you. Reach out to them, right? So sometimes even directing them in the direction of someone who also is doing similar work, someone who can also help them, would also be helpful at that time.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because I just think, you know, we're in this community of individuals. And so just having that conversation is like, yeah, say this, but then what? So it's always good to continue on that conversation, because the work that you guys do is so important. And I know burnout is real. And I know the burdens are heavy. I know people probably come to each one of you and tell you things that they probably haven't told anybody. And so that can be heavy as well. So carrying other people's burdens, being an activist yourself, fighting for your own rights, that can be very tiresome. So that kind of leads us to the next question for Rikki. You have posted a number of videos to your YouTube documenting issues such as the mental health crisis in the deaf community and how to talk about mental health with loved ones. What injustices contribute to the mental health crisis in the deaf community? And how has YouTube and various social media outlets supported your ability to share this message with the world?
Okay, so I did sort of cover it already, but just to reiterate, one of them being, like the lack of access to ASL interpreters. So, yeah, we had, here's the thing about the ADA, and I think it's about to be 32 years old this year. The ADA may be a law, but it's never actually really enforced because everybody always tends to find a loophole, or they just don't care, and the government just kind of like, oh, we don't care to enforce it. But yeah, like just the lack of being able to not only find ASL interpreters, because sometimes people just don't want to put in the work, or they don't want to pay for it. I've had moments when I'm like, hey, will you be able to bring an interpreter into the sessions? And they'll be like, oh, well, could you just bring your own? As like, one, you want me to pay for it? No. And two, as if I just have an interpreter running around in my back pocket. Might need to tell the folks about ADA. Oh yeah, you're right. The ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act that was signed into law in 1990. I've lost track of time. COVID, thanks. Time is a blur. But yeah, it's the Americans with Disabilities Act. Thank you for reminding me. But yeah, so ideally that is supposed to make it so that if you need interpreters, if you need captions, if you need wheelchair, buildings need to have wheelchair access if they're under 30 years old or something like that. That's typically, ideally, what the ADA is supposed to be for, but the government doesn't really tend to enforce it, which that is a whole other issue that can be made for its own panel on another day. But yeah, so just the lack of interpreters or captions, whatever, and finding people that are even just the interpreters themselves, trying to find anybody that is even conversational in ASL, because thing is, ASL and English are two completely different languages with two completely true ASL being two completely different grammatical structures, right? Like ASL takes more of a Korean and Japanese format of what is English grammar even actually? What, like English being subject, verb, adjective, and then Korean and Japanese being more like object, subject, verb, depending, basically. So typically that's what it's supposed to be, but. And then not only just the whole, well, we're not having ASL or sign language access in general, depending on country, but also the financial aspect. Therapy is not cheap. Obviously, good therapy isn't cheap, and even the sliding scales can be difficult. But, and I mean, like, disabled people, deaf people, whatever, disabled people in general, tend to be underemployed, massively underemployed, and also massively unemployed. Because again, you want to go in for a job and they'll be like, yeah, we don't think you're going to be capable of doing this and that, so we're not going to hire you. So trying to get the money to be able to afford that type of therapy, and there's just so much that goes into it. And the thing about the internet is it's amazing, and it's also a circus at the same time. It provides as much good as it does bad on a regular day. So people may not know about this because people don't really think about disabled people on a regular basis. It's sad to say, but unfortunately it's true. And so being able to say, hey, we need this, we need that, or we need to not have this and not have that, and it just go out to billions of people without really having to put too much work into it. You need an internet connection, click on a button, they can watch it, boom. So that's and here comes the brain fog, forgive me. But but yeah, it's just, you can go out so you can get information out to so many people. I've learned so many things, both important and both absolutely completely random and nonsensical, but interesting and fun, thanks to the internet. So that's just, we love the internet for that type of thing.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. And so what is your message? Because it says your ability to share this message with the world. So is that your message, just access, be aware? Or is there a little bit more to that? Or what is your message? I know that's a hard thing to say. What is your message on?
It is, because I feel like there's just so many different messages, but it's hard to consolidate it all. I guess if I try to make one sentence to consolidate, I'll attempt to. Just listen to us when we say it, but not only like listen to us, but actually do the same. Because I feel like sometimes when we say like, hey, listen to this, they're like, okay, we hear you. You want this, and they'll be like, but cool, I don't care, bye. So right. Like, you know, be aware, but also not just be aware, but I don't know I'm sure there's a vocabulary word for this, but I can't think of it, but just actually do the thing. At least it may not be perfect. Accessibility will never be 100% perfect because, like I said before, accessibility differs between two different people all the time. Wheelchair users, blind people, deaf people, whatever, our accessibility will differ all the time, especially even when it comes to captions. Like somebody's going to prefer yellow and black over white and black because there may be a visual issue, but you can't have a video and put all, like if you have burn-in captions, right, you can't just do all different kinds of formatting because then you can't even see the actual video. So, you know, but just try, at least put in some effort into the listening, but also the actual doing.
Yeah, I like it. Put in the effort. I think that's what a lot of this just really boils down to, just like what Lee was talking about earlier, just the awareness, right, of the privilege. Like so many times we go through this life and we just don't even realize, oh, this may be an accessibility issue for someone else. So that's a really good point. So Lee, I'll get to you. Just last year, the American Psychological Association, APA, issued an apology for being complicit in contributing to systematic inequities in the discipline of psychology. While an apology was a start, there's greater work to be done. What steps would you like to see the APA take next, and how can allies be actively involved in this work?
I think one thing would be to acknowledge that an apology without change is actually an insult. You know, talk about the plan on what you're going to change, how you're going to do it, show people that you started making those changes. I think that one area that is, you know, everybody talks about, you know, that everybody needs a community. We're you know, we've got 6 million plus years of ancestors that lived in a community and we taught us to need it. And then we're living in a society where many of us don't really have an intact community. So, you know, they need to be involved in community building, especially around the mental health professionals. But also just understanding that part of our requirement is to go out in our community where we're living and get engaged. The thing that I found really useful is to do that myself, and I think it's extremely useful as a white guy to make a commitment to a Black-led, maybe women-led, maybe non-binary, you know, whatever, the opposite of me, and learn how to be obedient and just get used to following leadership. I think that's an incredible education about how to be a therapist, to help kind of intentionally disrupt the power balance, and how to, you know, be aware I'm coming in with all this power, so I've got to do things intentionally to disrupt that. And you really can't do that just by book learning and lecturing. It has to be experiential learning. So I think that one of the authors that I studied, I think it may have been in White Fragility, the author said that they never really call themselves an ally. I'm not going to label myself as an ally. It's up to you to decide if I'm your ally or not, you know. I think that the second question, part of the question is, you know, how can allies be actively involved in the work? It's like the question says it. You get actively involved in the work in with a commitment to learn how to not be harmful. I think we talk a lot about cultural humility, which is so important, but also we need to bring up the need for a personal humility. And how do you do that? You know, so yeah, there's one of the benefits of getting involved in like, you know, I live in Jefferson County and there's some incredibly talented people doing incredibly beautiful work towards social justice. And if you just watch the news, you don't realize how rational it is to have hope. But when you go and start talking to these brilliant people and seeing their actual work, it's very inspiring. So it's a really great way to detox from the cultural negativity and just see, real people are doing real things and real change is happening.
That was good. There's a lot of nuggets. I see the chat box is going crazy. I love your definition of like what an ally is. You don't get to define that. That's for the group of individuals that you are trying to service or help in some ways, because what we learned even yesterday in yesterday's session, when people attempt to help or they say different things, it can actually be insulting. It can, it can really put a wedge between that community and other people as well. So just coming in there and being humble, like I don't have all the answers. I think that's the biggest thing. I think with working with anybody, when you come from a place of privilege, like you're not their savior, right? So having that savior complex would really, like, just removing that would just start the conversation and start that process as well. So thank you so much for sharing that and just talking about the work that needs to be done before the work is done, right? Because I think there's a lot of times we just think like, oh, you just get in there and you just do, but you're actually causing more harm without that knowledge, without acknowledging some of the places that you come from the privilege that you stand from. It actually causes more harm. And then the person coming in there to help is upset about it. Like, I'm just trying to help, so. So we have a couple of questions. I'm going to get to those too in the Q&A box as well as in the chat, but this is a question for everybody. So if anybody wants to answer, they can. In the book titled Social Injustice and Mental Health, Dr. Ruth Shim and Dr. Sarah Benson stated that mental clinicians bear a special responsibility to be aware of structural inequities and advocate for mental health equity. In what ways can clinicians provide effective care to clients while using their role to dismantle structural inequities in mental health?
I'm going to be the shortest answer, so I'm just going to offer to go first because I'm going to end up being a broken record, but just listen to your client. Without sounding like a broken record, but just to reiterate, listen to your client because they're going to know what they need the most in terms of access, not only just from like interpreter standpoint, but also like even a mental health point, like, boundaries, like if they're like, I don't want to talk about this or I don't want to do this. Physical health, even like, when you go into a gynecologist or something like that, just being like, I don't want to do this, I don't want to do that. The eating disorder thing is also, part of the mental health side of the spectrum. So when you're like, I don't want to have my weight taken, like when you're going to a regular doctor, or whatever, you get where I'm going here. You just don't want to be like, I don't want to have my weight taken because I don't want to, trigger that inside of me. Like, you have that right. You could just be like, I don't want to do that. So listening to the client, your patient, whoever, whatever, I think that's going to be like the number one thing because everybody's different. And, that's the number one way that you're going to help your client, your patient, whoever actually be seen and be heard.
All right, thank you. Anybody else want to tackle the question?
Renee, will you repeat the question once more, please?
Sure. I'm trying to see how good I can get through this without stumbling over my words today. Okay. In the book titled Social Injustice and Mental Health, Dr. Ruth Shim and Dr. Sarah Benson stated that mental clinicians bear a special responsibility to be aware of structural inequities and advocate for mental health equity. In what ways can clinicians provide effective care to clients while using their role to dismantle structural inequities in mental health?
Yeah, so recently I've been watching scholars and academics testify before the Senate Judiciary Committee about the harmful impact of Roe v. Wade, the consequences of the Roe v. Wade decision. And I've been hearing those professionals poignantly speak to the ways that certain folks will be more harmed, right? And I think as someone who has education and social class status and power and privilege and who people listen to and trust, I think it's your social responsibility to use what you know to use data, to use narrative storytelling, to amplify the voices of those on the margins. And so whatever you need to do, right, to make sure that you are accurately speaking to folks' lived experiences, and also recognizing that there's a certain power that shows up when you show up in a room, right? So all my folks with these master's degrees and PhDs and these licenses and all of this stuff that we got, I need folks to be a little more bold about standing in the gap, and about articulating what you have heard from folks on the margins, what they continue to express to you in life, what they continue to express to you online, and amplify those voices. Give them venue. If you've been invited to speak, bring someone on the margins with you. Let them speak before you. Give your time to them, right? If you've been given a lecture, bring folks with you and default to them, right? I just think there's a way that we have to do advocacy differently than what we've been doing. So many of us have just been, I'm smart, I'm gonna write a nice article, and once I write this nice article, like, that's it, I have nothing else that I need to do. And it's like, nah, it's so much more that you gotta do. Like, you gotta do way more than that. And sometimes it means putting something on the line, right? Even if you might get in trouble. Even if you're gonna make some folks mad or upset, you got to put something on the line. You got to be willing to risk something for social change. And that's my, that's where I stand on it, because I'm willing to risk it all for my folks. I will put it all on the line for my folks, and everybody who knows me knows that, right? It's nowhere that I'm afraid to be uninvited from when it comes to advocating for my folks.
Wow, there's a lot of nuggets in that one too. There's nowhere that you're afraid to be uninvited from. And I think that's huge, because I think so many times, just like Lee was saying earlier, like we are taught to be in community, but now we're not really in community. And what does that look like? And shunning and shaming is still real, right? And so, like, what does that look like? But as you said before, it can cost everything. And so we really have to have that discussion, because I think it's so easy to change your profile picture or change, do those things. That doesn't cost us anything. And that's not true advocacy in the way in which you're saying. That doesn't make real change, because somebody can unfriend you and then you're out of their picture. But if you're up close, personal, in spaces, they can't ignore you in that way. So that's a really good way to look at it. Lee, do you have anything to add to that question? Do you want me to read it again, or?
I brought a copy, thanks. I think that having an accurate analysis of history and current events is essential. I thought of this analogy. It's like if I'm a therapist and I don't know all that, it's like I'm a family doctor and I'm treating a family that has developmental delays, anxiety, depression, immune problems, and I'm trying to treat all those problems, but I completely missed the fact that they lived in a house that was poisoned with lead for 20 years, and they've internalized that lead. I couldn't possibly treat it effectively till I realized what the real problem is and where it came from. If I think that we've got to be rigorous and vigilant about shaping our perception, so that we not only see people, but in verbal and nonverbal ways, we're giving people the message, you are not defective in any way. All of your feelings are valid. Sometimes they don't seem like where they mean what they mean to, or where they come from. But, one of my teachers said something I thought was really succinct, that resilience and strengths and selfhood is intrinsic. Trauma is acquired. And I think that's true for so many things. Even if we talk about a genetic propensity to have anxiety, that's not me. I acquired that from my past. So when you see things accurately, you're motivated to address the real problem, and the actions you're going to take are more effective because you're trying to solve the real problem rather than just what it seems to, or what your biases kind of create a mirage. One of the things that I just wanted to add was the way that I've kind of think about trauma is our nervous system is to experience what our digestive system is to food. We're supposed to have an experience, process it, metabolize it, take out the nutrients, poop out the rest, you know. But if we put something in our mouth we can't chew, or it gets stuck in our throat, then we can't digest it. And that's, you know, trauma memories are actually stored in a different part of the brain than long-term memories are. So that's the reason I think it's important to look at that medically, that there's there's nothing in that that indicates that you're sick or broken or inadequate or, you know, any of that. This is just the way the human beings are built. This is the way experiences that overwhelm us affect human beings. And so is our capacity, our incredible capacity for healing.
Absolutely. So that kind of leads me to a question that was asked in the Q&A, because we're talking about trauma. What does that look like? Trying to fix something and naming the thing, like calling a thing, I think is so important in this work. So what stereotypes do you think have been a hindrance or even become insight to biases towards marginalized groups that need to be addressed? And this can be for any and everybody, but that kind of piggybacked off of what you said earlier.
I'll start and then I'll pass it to my panelists. So when I think about some of the stereotypes that hinder or get in the way of any of the work that we do, I'm always thinking about the ways that those negative portrayals or those tropes become solidified in like the public imagination. So how the public starts to see you as whatever you've been described as, right? So for instance, when they see young Black men, those young Black men being regarded as criminal, as monstrous, as scary, as intimidating, etc. And then that public imagination, right, then informs policy, then informs practices with medical professionals and like mental health professionals. Those folks adopt those things and they're responding to that as opposed to responding to who the actual person is or who the people are. I think that has I think we've seen that, right? We saw that with the era of super predators and the era of mass incarceration, where folks were disproportionately impacted, where Black and brown folks were disproportionately impacted by criminal justice reforms. That meant mandatory sentencing. That meant that when folks were being stopped, they were being over policed, hyper surveilled, over ticketed. All of those things have an impact on us, right? All of those things that impact our community does some deep level, and I really want to be careful here because I know that sometimes it can appear as if we are only responding to stereotypes, right? Or that we're only responding to those things, but also the data backs this up, right? The data says that, yeah, once you turn me into a criminal, you do impact, there are practices that will hyper criminalize me, right? Once you see me as a thing, you will live that out in your policy and practice. And so I'm saying that medical professionals and those of us who are highly educated have a responsibility and a duty to counter that as well. We have a duty to look for accurate data. We have a duty to respond to real live people, to hear their stories, to hear their voices, to honor them in real time. And I know that as a scholar and an intellectual, I don't deal in what the public imagination has suggested you are to me, right? I deal with you. Right? I listen to you. I listen to your story. I listen to your personhood. I listen to your heart. I see how you respond to others. And that work for me informs how I show up for you, how I listen to you, how I respond to you and advocate for you. And so I just want to give a little credence to that.
I think that's a great way to look at it too, because a lot of times people, the way that they talk about stereotypes or biases, they just think it's like, oh, it's the lady that clutched her purse and just walked away. But it also has effects in the physical health field, right? Like Black women are more likely to die at giving birth. Like these are things that are just like real statistics that we have. We learned yesterday that children are like Black children are like 8 times more likely to die from asthma than the white. Like these are real statistics. So it has a real bearing on how we live, breathe, and move throughout society, because how you see me indicates how you treat me. I was reading something before, and it was talking about, there was this whole movement about individuals, Black individuals in particular, not moving out of the way when white people are walking. And so they actually did some studies, and it showed that when white people saw Black individuals, their brains didn't light up like it did when they saw another person. It lit up like they saw an object. And so sometimes like we don't even realize just the biology of what that means. Like how you see people is how you treat them. And sometimes even if they'll say like, oh, I don't see any difference, the brain chemistry cannot lie. So those are conversations that I feel like we need to really kind of delve into. And so speaking about how we see things in mental health, there was a question, and it said, in dealing with the pandemic, what has changed concerning mental health? What has changed concerning mental health because of the pandemic? And this is for anybody that would like to take that on. Has there been any changes? Has access gotten better? I know there was some individuals that started doing online therapy, virtual therapy. Is that better? Has that helped with access? I mean, what does that look like in our community?
I'll go with, although it'll be a little bit scatterbrained because my brain is all over the place right now. But yeah, oh God, things in the deaf community, I want to say, and disabled community really at large, is that accessibility, because with the mask wearing and all, and I'm team mask, wear your mask and all that, but it doesn't negate the fact that for deaf people, especially oral deaf people who rely on lip reading and stuff, now that was practically impossible for the last 2 years because of all the mask wearing, and then it was already difficult to get people to like write down or type down what they were trying to say to us, even though you'd see them typing on Facebook literally seconds beforehand. True story. That's a whole tangent for another day. But like they'll just like, oh well, I don't want to type things down. They'll just like talk louder, and it's like, no, that doesn't really work. So the whole masking thing has definitely, added another layer of isolation when it comes to like trying to interact with hearing folks that don't know ASL. Also just the fact that, if you're immunocompromised, I think that's how you say it, you can't really go out to events, or you can't really do your own regular grocery shopping because people, especially with mandates being lifted now, and people are getting more and more worried about going out, and we have the new variants coming out, things like that. So in terms of mental health, with like being there, like I know there's things like BetterHelp and things like that, and I know there's also a controversy going around with BetterHelp, at least in the YouTube world, because of sponsorships and this whole controversy about it not being like legitimate. That's again for something for another day. It's kind of a toss of being back and forth, because again, it goes back to what we were saying before about there being like a lack of ASL interpreters. I had tried BetterHelp before, and while it worked in terms of like you do have the option to like write like an instant message, direct messages, things like that. But again, it's still not the same because there's still this disconnect, because it's just text, and I don't know. I think the consensus about my brain is like off right now, but I think the consensus really in the community talking about on Twitter, whether it's just deaf Twitter or disabled Twitter at large, has just been like, it's been extra depressing. I don't know if it's been more accessible. It was with like, adding curbside stuff and things like that, but mental health wise, it's just been like, okay, cool, bye, basically.
Okay. Well, that's a good conversation to have, because I think a lot of times people just assume like, oh, well, I mean, now you can do it on your phone or whatever. They think about that accessibility and not the other things that kind of come along with that. The technology is great because I can have it on my phone, but like you said, it's not real time, or there's a disconnect there, which is very important, especially in therapy, because you have to have rapport with your therapist in order to be able to say the things you need to say and to get and receive the information that they have as well. So I want to give each of the panelists, some final thoughts before we get ready to wrap up. I thank you guys so much for your time. We've been together for a whole hour, and I thank you guys so much for staying with us, being engaged. The conversation in the chat has been amazing. So I'm gonna turn it over to the panelists and let you guys have final say.
Thank you for listening to me babble.
It was informative, I promise.
I just want us to follow the work of folks on the ground, particularly grassroots organizations and so organizations that are great to follow, organizations like No More Martyrs, follow organizations that are also doing health work in the community, and that's mental health, but all other forms of access and accessibility work, right? So here in Birmingham, I'm always thinking about organizations like TAKE and TKO and BAO and No More Martyrs and Margins Helping Black Women. Those organizations I know are always committed. Be a Blessing Birmingham. Those types of organizations are always committed to doing the types of works that we need to see in our community, which is really centered around mutual aid and support, access, and even organizations that are doing important work around reproductive justice at this moment, because it is a critical juncture. So please stay connected, stay locked in, and follow those organizations, and also support and donate to those organizations that are doing that work.
Lee, any closing thoughts, remarks?
Just to express how grateful I am and how much I've gotten from this conversation. I really believe that we need to be a constant student, learn, just keep learning. I love that list you gave, Dr. Files. Another one that came to my mind is Brother Let's Talk, but there's some incredible work that's going on within a few miles that rarely makes the news. So it just is so good for people to get out and get connected. But I think the pandemic has kind of brought something that's been true, but maybe abstract for a lot of people, that we suffer. One of our nutrients that we need, like vitamins and minerals, is connection. And mental health is physical health. That false distinction and that we're experiencing a intersection of pandemics. In addition to COVID, we've got racism, trauma. A lot of them are not as well as acknowledged, but they're just as deadly. If you look at the body count, I'm not sure COVID is the worst pandemic we've got going on right now. But yeah, just to express how much I've learned from y'all, not just the knowledge, but just the being with you and y'all sharing yourselves and your experiences. It's been very enriching. Thank you.
Thank you to each one of our panelists. I've learned a lot as well. This was a very important session. Thank you for everybody that, shared their thoughts in the comments and the chat box. If you're receiving continuing education for this session, please complete the session link that's down there, the survey link, I should say. And now I'm going to turn it back over to our summit host. Thank you guys so much. I've enjoyed.